Hello, my wonderful friends in Mexico. Thank you again for inviting me to take part. I'm Andy Cowell, and this webinar that follows takes a look at my favourite area of ELT, which is graded reading, and how it absolutely fits in the curriculum and should not be put to the side if you have time, or if the students like reading, or if you like reading. Reading easily is the key. Not difficult, not always with tests, but with texts that the students choose and like for themselves. And then all sorts of benefits take place, not just the language benefits and of course a lifelong belief finally that reading doesn't have to be difficult, but it also develops life skills, the 21st century skills that we hear of now, collaborating, empathizing, critical thinking. And if you look at the stories that we read, even if it's watching TV and following stories, stories are the key in any age, not just primary, not just secondary, but also adults. Reading stories gives the students a chance to see all sorts of things happening. Characters in settings. Things go wrong. People love each other. People don't love each other. People fighting. People trying to solve problems. And in doing so, the students are exposed to those sorts of situations and develop the sorts of life skills that are so important. We're not just teaching English, we're teaching a communication skill. And if we're to communicate successfully, we need more than language. We need to know how to operate in a very multicultural and diverse world. So enjoy the webinar. Thank you for asking me to take part. I want you to think for a minute. Picture, what do you see when you think of, I'll come to English in a minute. Think of swimming lessons. I want you to imagine, what does that look like for you? All right, you're going to have swimming lessons, or you go back to when you remember them, okay? Right. Now, does it look like this? Did you think of this? I bet you didn't, right? I bet you didn't, and I think you know where I'm going to go with this, because I do feel very strongly about the way English is taught as a skill with lots of different applications, and not just a subject at school. Although school is where we learn English, it doesn't mean it has to be reduced just to the rules like this. And I think that's really important that we remember that this, for example, in swimming is what we think of. Different kinds of swimming, different attitudes to swimming. And if we are swimming teachers, isn't this what we want for our students? Isn't that what we want them to be able to do? Swim in different ways, in different weathers, and apply the rules, but in a way, I know that you don't really do this when you swim and you go to lessons for swimming, but actually my point is there's a balance that we need. And when we teach English, we are not just teaching the rules and the lists of words, we are teaching not even just the skills, the reading, the writing, the listening and speaking, like the good old days of learn this and now test that. That's not really enough, because what does it mean to have good English? It's accurate, or you can read and write English, but how are you going to speak? How are you going to express yourself when you're writing? What do you think when you listen to something or read something in English? And I think this is why it's really important that when we are talking about language skills, we're talking about communication. It is only about communication. And I think it's become more and more important over the last, I would say, decade, where more and more schools, more and more curricular designs across many countries are realizing that we've been teaching language, but we haven't been teaching communication. And that is exactly what we want the students to do, isn't it? I mean, let's just forget for a minute what the exam is asking, okay? Because just because the exam asks for one thing, it doesn't mean it can't change one day to become perhaps a more meaningful series of parameters to see to what extent our students have learned to use English, not to repeat words and translate them and use the correct tense or preposition. That's really the rule. It's the body, the skeleton that you saw earlier. But how are they going to swim? You know what I mean? How are they going to use that language? And these are really the skills that they are supposed to be equipped with. These are the top 10 skills from a survey that would make them highly employable in the future when they leave school. And take a look at that list there. And as you look at that list, what you see, of course, is what we may take for granted in the real world. And maybe, to some extent, we are teaching that at school. But are we really actively pushing those skills? Because this is what will differentiate one student from another when they're going for work, promotion, or even, in many cases now being self-starters, working for yourself. Many, many more paths are out there for students to do their own thing in work. And, English isn't really on that list at all. It's a given, like reading and writing. Employers and customers, they expect it. So sadly, teaching vocabulary and grammar isn't really enough. It's going to be, how are you going to use your English? Now, I know that we do that to some extent, but how can we do it more? If you look at that website later, you'll see that that's one of many articles out there on the skills that our learners are going to need for the workplace when they leave school. And in fact, there's a survey there, the top 5 skills that employers look for. This was from a recent survey from LinkedIn, the platform, the social media platform for executives, professionals around the world. What skills? They were asked, what skills do you look for? And they put number 1, creativity. 2, persuasion. How do you influence people? How do you manage a negotiation? And how do you collaborate? And how adaptable and flexible are you? And how do you manage your time? Now, it's really tempting on a session like this, as an English teacher, to see that. Even look at that picture there, business. It all looks like a world away. You could even show it to a student and they'd think that's just not relevant, because they've become locked into thinking they've got to go from lesson to lesson, from exam to exam, and come out the other end with grades. But if those grades are only teaching or showing the command of English, it isn't showing a command of what they're going to do with it. And I would argue, and many people are, not only arguing the case to have these softer skills, but they are important. The hard skills, I guess, would be, the mechanics of the subjects and the language. But how are they going to use it? How are they going to interact with others? How can they work in society around them, make a positive contribution, be self-aware? We're going to look at that now, about what these softer life skills are. But it's not, if we're not preparing students for the real world, what are we doing? And it's in the news all the time. If you check out that link later, that's one of many articles where employers are saying, look, just as important to us are so-called soft skills, character skills, the ability to articulate yourself clearly, confidence, grit, that's resilience, or being tenacious, self-control. They are saying that we are not seeing enough of this in kids coming out of school. And at every point, I will just keep reminding all of us in teacher training sessions, whether I'm visiting or doing sessions like this for you to watch in the comfort of your home, we are definitely supposed to be doing this for our students, preparing them for this instead of just language. But when we look at life skills, and again, the skills for life are, what we sometimes call future skills, or skills for the 21st century. Why the 21st century? Well, I suppose because we talk now about being in a very multicultural, multitasking, complex, ever-changing world. And maybe that is true, but I would also argue these life skills were always important. I mean, I think it's kind of good they're here now, more prevalent in teacher training and curriculum designs, but I think they really should always have been there, don't you? And if they're not in your school or in your area or with your colleagues, what can you do to change it? Because it is changing, and you will be left behind if you're not. If you think that English teaching is just to get the exam results based on grammar and vocabulary, well, okay, teach to that until the exams change, but you can still introduce material which is particularly good when you're reading, which we'll look at, to really enhance and develop those skills, which are in 3 areas really: the thinking, cognitive side, the social side, and the emotional side, the emotional intelligence. And are we not teaching young people to become good human beings, working with other human beings? Isn't that what we want from them? And I think putting these subjects at school into different categories we can lose our way by becoming just academic deliverers of knowledge. And of course, if you look around now on YouTube, which we'll look at some examples of where you can go, you'll see a lot of people out there with a lot of research to say students who are taught these skills will perform and do perform better. We don't need to teach people how to have a good memory. We've got plenty of good robots getting better and better. Yeah, we are actually preparing students to compete against robots, and the robots can't do this. They've got the memory. So why are we giving them all these tests for knowledge recall when this is what they need? And we've got to keep trying to change the way that's done. If you look around, I mean, this is kind of a very typical example. If you look around and see some of these many websites with great resources about just general summaries of what we mean by life skills or the 21st century skills, just take a little look at that and you'll see immediately the kind of human interaction or self-awareness that's needed in our daily lives. And why should we wait until we're all really grown up and to figure out what these abilities might mean? Why can't we do more in the classroom? And we should do. And if we're doing some now, we should do more. And I'm going to argue the case today that with examples from reading, more and more reading, not only does graded reading allow for language acquisition and good, frequent exposure to the language of the student's own level, their level, not the level we're giving them. What do they find easy to read? What are they interested in reading? Then these are the very things that they will see before them in stories and different narratives in different contexts. For now, I just want you to know that there are, if you Google life skills in education, soft skills in education, 21st century skills, you'll see things like this. So get to know it, explore it, and as you look at course books or reading materials, how can you give the students language practice that also lets them develop these skills? And train yourself as a teacher to know what other teachers are doing about this, because they are out there. There's a great simple article out there from the British Council, which is a quick summary of what life skills are and why and how they found their way into general English teaching curricula from primary right through secondary and young adult, because this is really everything. We are preparing learners to go out into the world with English, but how are they going to use it? Citizenship, that means they can behave positively and with self-awareness in their communities and when they travel. And they look after their own well-being. How do they manage anxiety? How do they work with conflict? How can they make a positive contribution to their community? How can they use that knowledge they have by being informed and articulate what they need to influence others, to persuade or to be persuaded, keep an open mind, be tolerant, accept diversity? And these are all topics that they do occur, but I sometimes wonder if too many English curriculum designs will be very top heavy on grammar, lists, vocab tests, irregular verbs. We become obsessed, or the system will allow us to fall into the trap of just teaching the skeleton that you saw before, or the rules, the equation for buoyancy, instead of getting them swimming in different styles of swimming. And I really believe that. That's just not a cute way to start this session. I do believe that's everything, and it is happening around the world. So get to know the articles that are out there, explore teaching blogs, magazines and videos about the way this is happening in English language classrooms around the world. And the reason many don't do this is maybe they didn't really know about it. Maybe this is you. Maybe that you have been, teaching only grammar and vocabulary with some of the skills because that's what the exam does. But it doesn't mean we can't do it more by exploring what's out there, what other teachers are doing. And I think it's often because people think there's no time. I'm an English teacher. I haven't got time to teach people how to be people or humans or behave. I'll do some discipline in the classroom, but I teach English. No, you're teaching people to communicate in a second language. Communication, unless you want them to talk to themselves, they're going to be talking with other people from different backgrounds for different reasons. And I think also because it's not measured. People would feel strongly that they can teach life skills, these other sort of cognitive, social and emotional abilities with students, but at the same time they're not tested, so maybe it's tempting to leave it. But just because we don't test it around the world, and maybe one day we will, then it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I think that's also important. So do understand, please, and look around. English teachers right now are teaching 21st century skills. You'll see it in loads of materials, and it's there for a really important reason. And I do sometimes wonder why it's taken so long. To call it 21st century makes it feel very futuristic and modern, but I guess we know the 21st century is now, and I guess life was always complex. It's just more complex in a different way. So we don't want kids just to remember rules and knowledge, because it looks like the robots and the artificial intelligence are going to do very well with that, thank you. How can we stand out and also be competitive? You know, you'll see these sorts of titles. This was from a recent conference I went to. These are topics by teachers for teachers on how they bring 21st century skills into their English language teaching. Articles like this appear all the time, more talks that I saw. Turning the 21st century into 21 different teaching techniques. So just look out there for ideas and activities that teachers have created, and I'll show you some that you can use with reading in a moment. Critical thinking, I mean, we all know now that's really, really important and top of the list. You know, if you're going to read something, well, I don't want them to just translate it into their language and understand the English. What do they think about it? Are they going to evaluate? How are they going to respond? You know. So these are the sorts of things you'll see at many English language teaching conferences around the world. So it's a universal movement now. So you know, we have to keep up with that and explore what can we do to change it. Look on Twitter, look on Facebook, you know. By the way, if you don't do Twitter, that's okay. It's quick to find out how. But please don't think that Twitter is something where you have to be sending pictures about your food or your holiday like Instagram. Both Instagram and Twitter can be good for just finding out information. You don't have to get lots and lots of followers to get a lot out of Twitter. I don't do that. I have followers, but Twitter is really good. If you put a hashtag for the right kinds of things like English language teaching or graded reading, or here I've put 21st century skills, you'll see a lot of experts or even just regular teachers sharing information in order to help us all collaborate and be better. And here I would advise you, sign up for Twitter, hashtag some things that you'd like to know about, life skills in this case, or future skills, 21st century skills. Another one would be social and emotional learning, or hashtag SEL. That's on Twitter. You can have just one follower or none and still find out. And these are always good little snippets of information you can find. And of course YouTube. You know, if I put in, as I did, 21st century skills there, what I like about these sorts of videos is, yes, I could put in 21st century skills in English language teaching or life skills, and you'll see a number of things like this for specifically for English teachers, but I like to look at the ones which are about general education, because English isn't just one subject and very different from the rest. It's got principles that apply to all subjects, and I found these two that I really would recommend that you look at. This first one here on skills that every child will need to succeed. She looks at how the brain can be rewired, programmed from the beginning with social interaction to develop. It's only a typical TED talk, 15 minutes I think. Very, very clear, very, very enjoyable about the different ways in which we can get students to develop their soft skills, but she doesn't call them soft skills because she feels they're not soft, they're just as important. She calls them key skills, and I like that. That particular talk looks at the younger learner, but please know that this is very much a thing for secondary as well. The way to catch kids early, of course, is the early years, but it's not too late for the teenagers. And in fact, I think that would be great to feel that they're still being developed as people, because that's the time when you are changing and becoming an adult. In the Grant Lichtman talk, he looks at his experience from 30 years, and then in that other part of his talk, a specific trip where he went to see many, many different kinds of schools. And he found that 30 years before he started, changes were being asked of these schools, not the same ones, but general education. And 30 years later, some things had changed and some things hadn't. And the changes that were suggested were logical ones, but just don't happen. So he explores about what stops education from changing. What are the obstacles? How can we overcome them? Because he summarizes with huge optimism to say, you know, I went to one school and they say it's hard, we can't do it, and then he'll find that a school down the road actually has solved that problem. And then he also looks at what is hard and what is just uncomfortable. In other words, how willing are we to change if we believe that we are missing something here? If we're just producing students to remember grammar and vocabulary and not preparing them to be communicators in a global language, then what are the obstacles and how can we overcome them? And it might be uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean it can't change. And he demonstrates, as I'm seeing for myself around the world, that changes are being made. Just because it's hard, it might just be uncomfortable and needs a bit of time and resilience. And these are the habits that we teach our learners. And I'm just going to go into the material now that would be useful for students when they're reading. So I'm just going to look at the way looking at stories, and by stories I really emphasize that stories and books are for everyone. So reading and stories, as you'll see in other talks I've given, and we'll always love to talk about, it looks at how there seems to be time in primary for the fun of stories and reading, and then in secondary it all becomes very narrow and restricted as the curriculum leads us to move away from stories and reading and only teach coursebook driven workbook materials that will then make everybody feel that English is just something to do for homework, practice grammar, vocabulary and go home, and it's not really working. So when we do show stories to students, and especially classics, although I won't just limit today to classics, they were not written for school, were they? If you think about it, they were not. They were written, well, why were they written? Why did Shakespeare write Romeo and Juliet? Why did Dickens write Oliver Twist? Not to be studied, but, well, because they were about people, weren't they? They were about relationships. They were about the way that they interact in society, what's good and bad about society, the way that the writers can comment and show in stories how those characters respond to the society and the people around them. You know this, the dilemmas they face, the conflicts that they have to resolve. The narratives always have something going wrong, and the characters have to endure, find resolution, find their own development, and become self-aware. Characters learn along, or they don't learn along the way. And of course this is why we want more and more reading in the classroom, because yes, it teaches us language and lets the students be exposed to the language at their level. And do please look at these other webinars that I've done on how to do more reading with students to boost their results, not just to give them something new to do or extra. This is really powerful. But of course, as you read, we know that reading is its own reward. They learn about the world around them, their values, they learn about other characters and what they would do, and all that is bound up in a way that brings us neatly to, the way that life skills, these other skills about working with others and how we need to develop our own character is something we learn at school. And if we read books, we're going to be exposed to more worlds and characters and cultures from which we can learn. Nice article there you can read on how classical literature will teach us life lessons. Now I'm going to show you now some examples, because in the LE Graded Readers, this glorious collection, hundreds of books from the very young to the young adult and adult, all levels and all ages and all topics, all genres. And I'm going to quickly pick out some examples from these books, so that in these little extracts I'm going to ask you to just look at the pages or page from some of these books, and then stop and think about what are the life skills that are going on there, what are the values and character traits or abilities that we want our students to see as a result of reading. Are you ready? So here's one here from The Wizard of Oz. Pause this video and have a think about what's going on here. What are the values that we're teaching? Okay, so I hope you paused and thought about that and wrote down some ideas. And here are some ideas that I had about what's happening in that text. You can see empathy and friendship, people working together and showing courage. Of course, that's what the Wizard of Oz can do. And resilience. Another life lesson in that book is, of course, disappointment. If you don't know the end, you'll see that there's a disappointment there, and then characters will realize that actually you don't need magic. The magic is within you. This comes from a lovely story about a dinosaur egg. Pause the video, okay, read this text and figure out, what do you think are the life skills here? What are the values we're teaching? Okay, so here you can see problem solving, resourcefulness and collaboration. Just quickly tell you, there's a lovely story, this, I think it's called Dr. Domuch and the Dinosaur Egg. And the young girl finds an egg at the beginning of the story. She hatches the egg and then is worried that paparazzi and media will go crazy over this dinosaur egg, so she gets her friends to find a way to hide the dinosaur. And it's a lovely story there of working together, working with your friends, being compassionate about this dinosaur. And in this story, as it develops, just pause this video and read this part and see what's happening here in terms of the way we behave towards ourselves and to others. Just pause and think about the life skills here. Yeah, compassion, friendship. They find a castaway, a guy who's on his own on the island that they take the dinosaur to, and they realize, well, he's sad, so he feels loneliness, so they help him. You know, this is what we mean by students seeing stories, and teenagers will see some older, more advanced texts as well, where this is what we want them to. Now, this is kind of obvious. You're thinking, I know. You know, you're thinking, oh, I know this. You know, I'm looking at these texts. I know what you mean, Andy. Yeah, I can see a book's nice. It's about friendship. Yeah, I know. But how much reading do we give the students to see this, or do they see much more workbook exercise work, or do they do much more course book work with you? Because if they are, then they're missing this. I mean, a course book might say, you know, let's do some critical thinking, or how important is friendship to you, but it looks like a little exercise in the bottom of the book sometimes, and that's all the course book can do. But if the students are reading more at their level, they will learn these values, or see for themselves as a habit about the way characters interact, and crucially they will see the language you've been teaching them over and over again, which is the purpose of graded readers. There you go. Here's one from a drama version of Robin Hood. Read this, pause the video, read this, and what are the values here? What are the life skills here? Right, here we go. I've put down selflessness, altruism, okay, making sacrifices for others, courage, Robin Hood, come on. Showing thanks, being grateful, showing your gratitude, and working for the community. Robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. Now, if that's not community, I don't know what is. Although I do not endorse stealing at this point. It's just a story, but the message is nice. Yes, very good. Oh, cute one there. This is from The Hare and the Tortoise. Well, just look at this very quickly. What's the value here? What are the life skills here? Right, okay, modesty, or not being modest, and what that looks like, and how we feel when someone isn't modest. It's kind of bullying. This is a story where there's some bullying here, and showing off, I'm faster than you. So kind of making comparisons, and of course the tortoise, well, we know the story of the hare and the tortoise. Being confident, especially when the tortoise is being a bit bullied here. And in the story, poor Tilly is tired too, but she doesn't stop. So she's in the race, and the hare's having a sleep because he's way ahead. And she just keeps going. I can't stop now, I must finish the race, says Tilly. Look, there's the finish line, says Tilly. So we're seeing determination, resilience, never give up, keep going, no matter what. And then, at the end of the story, she beats the hare, who very nicely offers to shake hands. So be a good loser. You don't have to like losing, but you've got to acknowledge when you've lost and congratulate the winner. That's a nice thing to teach. Grit, which is also Good. Never give up. Determination. And be your best self. And show humility. Okay, so, these stories are full of these things. What's this one? Oh, this is another young one. This is from The Ant and the Grasshopper. This is another cute one. Pause the video. Figure out the life skills. Yeah? You could also do this with your students, couldn't you? You could pick pages and let them tell you, discuss what they see as the life skills, and of course, more importantly, how could they take those bits of text or the characters, the situation, and talk about how it might apply to their life. Now, I realize here this is a primary book, and it's certainly not just the domain of the young learners to learn life skills, but you could maybe do your best there. We'll come to some older ones in a moment. This one's about saving up for a rainy day, because the ant works hard when the grasshopper plays, and when winter comes, grasshopper's got no food, no shelter, but the ant is all ready. But they share. And if you look at this text, the story goes on. Okay, you can pause it and read this, but you can see that there's endurance here. The ant keeps going through hardship to save for a rainy day. Very resourceful, but doesn't turn the grasshopper away. A sense of community, being good to your neighbours, and sharing the food. Ant opens the door. She's got lots of food. There's soup, vegetables and fruit. See, got food, regular English language vocabulary, but the story is also with a message. Now, this is just these are just extracts from books. The books don't beat the students over the head with a message all the time, but as the students get familiar with reading, a reading habit, and isn't that what we want from our students, a reading habit, they, even perhaps unintentionally, as we all do, learn about how to behave, good behavior, bad behavior, self-awareness, examining feelings. This is what comes out of reading, isn't it? And that's why we should be exposing them to more and more books. And if you think you don't have time, look at what is out there on using graded readers, and particularly extensive reading. And there's a webinar or two about that from me, because with Ellie Publishing we've done some work on this. It is something you can slowly implement alongside your everyday coursebook work. There you go. At the end of the day, we learned from that story, the ant and the grasshopper, it's about work-life balance too. Now there's a lesson. We should be teaching that every day. Teaching ourselves, right? There's a book here called Granny Fix It. That's a series from Ellie. These are very well designed books, aren't they? Look, there's one about, well, you can ask the students to figure out what's going on. Okay, there's been a stranded whale on the beach here. What's the value here? What are we teaching students here in this couple of extracts? Pause the video. Have a look. What would your students say? What would they think are the life lessons here? Okay, there they are. What have I put here? Problem solving, respecting the elderly, because they're full of great ideas. And some cultures respect elderly people more than others, I think. And I like it that there's a character that does a lot of has a lot of adventures here with young children, and different things happen. And the Granny Fix It, she has ideas, great ideas in her handbag usually. So they're creative, resourceful. So remember, number one list on the list of workplace requirements, creativity, wasn't it? Collaboration, problem solving, decision making, working as a team. Looking after the environment, of course, comes up in this book and many others in the Ellie series. And at the end of the day, they all work together, they all pull together. See what I did there? And they show determination. And that's Granny Fix It. And the Viking children, I think it is. I can't remember that one now. Oliver Twist came up earlier. Now, we know Oliver Twist, everyone knows that, I think. I hope you do. It's about a boy in the very old days of England where children were treated with very little respect. They had to work hard, and he's an orphan. He has a long journey ahead of him of troubled times. And if you look at this text here, just this text alone captures the spirit of the book quite well in a very simple way. What would be the life skill or skills there, do you think? There you go. Keep on keeping on. endurance, resilience, optimism. That's Oliver Twist, There are so many twists in that book where he has to keep going against hardship and digging in, and then he finds very good characters, but some very bad ones too. Perfect book for showing students how life can be. It's tough. What can you do? You can find friends, you can avoid bad people, but stay optimistic. A Faraway World is a lovely original piece of fiction there from Ellie. You could show just the pictures, for example, from this book. Pick the book up, take the pictures, or use the digital version of the book, because Ellie's readers have a code in the cover of each book, and you can go to their website and sign into the digital interactive version. What could be this book's message? Okay, you could ask the students before you read. That would get them engaged in the story, wouldn't it? And you kind of get the idea there could be racism issues here, inclusion, diversity, friendship, bullying perhaps, fitting into the class. You can see immediately with these pictures what could be going on. And in the texts I want to just quickly show you here some examples. The life skills that come out of this particular one would be what? Pause the video and have a look. What do you think? Yeah, awareness, being aware of how others feel. Ambition, you want to be better than what your parents did. That's nothing wrong with that. Encouraging others. So these, look at this. This is where we examine our lessons and the journey that our students go on. How much of this do we really teach them, or do we just give them grammar lessons? You see, who's going to teach this if it's not the English teacher through reading? Fantastic. The story goes on. This is a longer text. If you want to read it, just pause the video and take a look, and then figure out what the life skills are here. What are the 21st century skills here? I've put here standing up for yourself and for others, and inclusion. So there's some racism here, but also a friend that the boy makes steps in, looks after him, and protects him, There you go. It carries on and shows strength. The character shows a lot of strength, and also managing anger, managing anxiety. As you know, there's a lot of press in most countries now about bullying, cyberbullying, and anxiety caused by whatever reason, because anxiety is part of life, getting low is part of life. How are we going to manage that? And mindfulness, looking after your anxieties and your low mood or those of others. There's a lot now for young people out there, and teachers are doing more to help students cope with their negative feelings and say that that's okay. But what can we do to help them? How can we let them explore how they feel and find their way back to a positive feeling? And these books are very good for showing that in the characters. It brings a lot out. And who hasn't read a story and responded like that? And that's what we want them to do. And moving into the sort of older students now and the more advanced texts, this is still simplified because we want the message to be clear. We're not teaching literature, we're teaching the messages that came from literature in a graded English way. Pause this part now and see what happens in Moby Dick here, and what are the life skills and the soft skill values coming out of this text. What did you get? Well, of course, the book is about obsession and ambition, and where that can lead you if it's too much, and where revenge can take you, and managing risk. All right, you might have other ideas for all of these texts. You might have different ideas. I hope you do. But my purpose is really just to show you by a variety of titles just how much, through simple reading, through a life at school of habitual reading, simple short books, which is what Ellie do best, to reveal these values through the characters and situations, whilst at the same time practicing the English. These texts shouldn't be used to just teach, comprehension. That's not the purpose. Reading regularly graded fiction and non-fiction, like these Ellie readers, is really to show the students the language they already know. So really, when they're doing extensive reading these books really should be done on their own, with a little library you can create, and they really shouldn't be looking up any words more than 3 or 4 times on a page, because we want them to read on their own at their level. And this will give them an example, for example, of the life skills are You know, what do you do if you want too much in the world and you're too ambitious or you're obsessed with revenge? You know, we learn a lot from this story, as indeed with Frankenstein. Pause this part and see what you think the life skills are there. All right, Frankenstein here, a text to show soft skills at work. Yeah, right. So I put down here that there are two sides to every story. Another one about revenge and where that will lead us into insanity and destruction. The dilemmas are so many in this book, and of course, critical thinking is a great book for, you know, is it right that we should create life like a monster and then see what happens? And then we see that the monster, the kids never know this because films always show Frankenstein as being, they think that the monster's called Frankenstein for one thing. And when they know that it's Dr. Frankenstein and the monster, they think the monster is evil. But of course, the message from the book is that the monster starts off like a baby, good. But society turns the monster into somebody evil, and that's an amazing story. It's a thrilling story, and of course the narrative is about two perspectives, Dr. Frankenstein's perspective and the monster, and of course that love is complex. It's not straightforward, and if they watch too many Hollywood films, it would be a one-sided message. It's actually a complex one, and Romeo and Juliet is another example of that, isn't it? So these are the readers that I chose for today to look at, and you can check them out on elliegradedreaders.com and examine for yourself the sorts of titles that you might like to use for your students. Try and find the topics and levels that fit with your classroom, but just remember that we're not going to take difficult texts like these and just drag our students through stories they can't understand. Let them read easily and fluently on their own, and they will see through a reading habit throughout 10, 12, 13 years of school. The more books they read like this, the more they will learn, more than English. They will learn to be sort of global citizens, right? They will see how to behave with others. And don't we know that the more people read, that the smarter they are? They know what's going on in the world. So subscribe if you want for more ideas like this, webinars and events and materials from Ellie. This is their website, ellieonline.com. And you can follow Ellie on social media. And if you go to the website and sign up, you can also download a really nice article and ideas from John Hughes, terrific writer and trainer on critical thinking. The link is there, but you'll have to sign in. It's free. And I like to pick out the critical thinking one here because this is one life skill that all teachers seem to know about and do a lot about. And there's ideas there on incorporating this into the classroom, critical thinking in the language classroom. So thank you for watching, thank you for taking part. Comments and ideas welcome as always. My details are there on the slide. Lessons in English, Lessons for Life. How graded reading teaches skills for the 21st century. I hope you believe that that is the key beyond teaching grammar and vocabulary and just the 4 skills. It's a more multi-dimensional approach that we need, and if you have a chance to inform your other colleagues about this and spread the word and explore the blogs and videos and articles out there, it would be doing a huge service for our students for the future. Thank you for taking part, and I'll see you next time.